MONGIL Stardive just held a pretty massive developer livestream over in Korea, and while this was technically supposed to be about version 1.3, I think the biggest news actually has less to do with 1.3 and more to do with where the game is going after it. Because the developers talked about the story, character balance, reruns, new progression, quality of life improvements, costumes, a new character, and even admitted that some of the things they originally wanted to put into 1.3 simply weren't ready. So today we're going to go through what was actually announced, what is coming in version 1.3 on August 19th, and why version 1.4 might end up being the much more important update. And before we get into it, there are already a few English summaries floating around, but after going through the original Korean broadcast, there are a couple of things being reported as confirmed that the developers didn't actually confirm. So I'm going to try to keep this to what they actually said. Let's start with one of the biggest announcements. The developers finally made a decision about the direction of the story. Cloud is the protagonist. This has apparently been an internal discussion for quite a while. The developers talked about originally wanting to potentially create more of a self-insert or player persona type character, but because they weren't sure which direction they wanted to go, they deliberately avoided giving Cloud and Verna too much narrative importance. And according to the developers themselves, that actually ended up hurting the story. They were basically holding Cloud back because they didn't want to build too much of the story around him if they were eventually going to introduce a player avatar. Now they've decided they're not going to keep sitting in the middle going forward. Cloud is the main protagonist, and the story is going to be written much more directly around him. Personally, I think that's probably the right decision. I don't really care whether a game uses a self-insert protagonist or an established protagonist. Both can work. The problem is when the game can't decide which one it wants, and it sounds like the developers realized exactly that. They're also looking at ways to make Cloud feel a little more personal to the player and improve how players interact with the rest of the cast. But there is an important distinction there. I have seen some people say that an affection system is definitely coming in 1.3. That is not what the developers said. They talked about improving interaction with characters and treating that as a high priority feature going forward. That's very different from saying there's a full affection system launching in version 1.3. So for now, I would not count that as a confirmed 1.3 feature. Instead of waiting for a large episode and then dumping the whole thing at once, they want the story to progress every 3 weeks. Essentially, every major update should move the story forward a little bit, and they plan to continue doing this with full voice acting. That is probably one of the best announcements from this entire stream. One of the biggest problems for live service games is when the main story disappears for months at a time. You log in, you do events, you farm characters, but the actual plot barely moves. If they can really maintain meaningful story progression every 3 weeks, that's a pretty big improvement. They also said they want the story itself to be more substantial. The focus will still primarily be on proper field quests and main story presentation, but they'll continue using event-style stories and other formats when they make sense. So the goal seems to be less fragmented storytelling and more consistent development of the characters and world. Now here's where things get interesting. The developers originally planned to put more into 1.3. That included new content and more extensive balance changes. But they decided to push those things into version 1.4 instead. And 1.4 is starting to sound like a pretty major update. They specifically mentioned Episode 7, a new legendary monster named Soren, new content, new progression systems, and a large-scale character rebalance. The balance changes are especially interesting because this does not sound like they're just buffing 1 or 2 weak characters. They said the entire 5-star roster is being reviewed. They're also looking at exclusive weapons as part of that process. And I think that's important because one of the biggest complaints I've seen around MONGIL is that some 4-star characters can feel better or more useful than 5 stars that players have invested significantly more resources into. The developers actually acknowledge that problem. They don't want players pulling a 5-star and then wondering why a lower rarity character is doing the job better. Now version 1-3 will apparently make smaller adjustments to Ophelia and Jiwon ahead of that big rebalance. But the large-scale changes are being saved for 1.4. So if you've got a 5-star character sitting on the bench right now, I definitely would not write them off yet.
2 knocks. Might not be enough, so 3? Might be too loud if there's a patient inside. Oh, maybe I can cough to signal my presence. Alright, enough practice. Huh? I don't look weird or anything, right? I'm actually from another world. So actually, I'm a really gross creature. No, Alfred! I'm sorry, it's gross, isn't it? Everyone out of the way! Stop! Don't hurt my friend. Close your eyes. I don't want you to see. Friends? Could I really dare to be your friend?
Of course, version 1.3 also brings us a brand new character. Brishell arrives on August 19th, and the developers spent a good amount of time showing her off during the livestream. Personality-wise, Brishell is a little unusual. She wants attention and wants to connect with people, but because of her appearance and the reactions she normally gets from others, she's also extremely awkward when that attention actually comes her way. That idea even carries over into her combat design with a state called attention overload. And then there's Alfred. Alfred is the enormous weapon that Brishell carries around with her. Although watching her fight, sometimes it looks more like Alfred is carrying Brishell. The developers clearly had some fun with that part of her animation and personality gameplay-wise. Brishell is being designed to work both as an active character on the field and as someone who can contribute while you're rotating through the rest of your team. She has an enhanced switch skill that activates part of her kit, and after swapping to another character, Brishell can continue assisting the team through additional attacks and support effects. So rather than being a character that you simply bring onto the field, use her abilities, and immediately forget about, her kit appears to be built around moving in and out of combat while continuing to contribute during those rotations. The developers didn't reveal absolutely everything about her during the stream, so we'll have to wait until she's actually available to get the complete picture. But between her unusual personality, Alfred, and a combat style built heavily around character switching and team interaction, Brishell definitely looks like one of the more interesting additions coming with version 1.3. We also got a pretty substantial look at Vivian.
There we go.
But unfortunately, the developers were extremely careful about what they revealed. They showed her, they talked about her, and then refused to tell us her element or her role. Those details are supposed to be revealed during the September 3rd roadmap livestream, so Vivian is coming. We just don't know exactly what she is yet. Now, this is where I think version 1.3 is actually better than it first appears. Because while it may be lighter on new combat content, there are a lot of quality of life improvements. First, the new player guide is being completely reworked, and importantly, existing players aren't just getting screwed out of rewards. The old guide is being retired, unfinished rewards are supposed to be distributed, and existing players will still be able to go through the new guide and collect its rewards as well. They also talked about improving the rewards significantly. There are plans for character rewards, recruitment items, and potentially a system that helps players obtain a standard character they actually want. The exact final rewards still need to be officially announced, so I wouldn't treat every detail as locked in. Yet new players are also getting a much friendlier reroll system. You'll be able to save a summon result and then continue rolling before deciding which result you actually want to keep. That is a massive improvement for anyone starting fresh. Because rerolling in gacha games is already tedious enough without forcing people to throw away a decent result just to see if the next one is better. Request rewards can now be collected immediately. You no longer have to finish the request and then walk all the way back to the guild hall just to turn it in. You finish the objective, you get the reward done. It's a small change. But it's one of those small changes that probably saves players a ridiculous amount of wasted time over the course of a few months. The subscription is also getting buffed pretty heavily. Monsterling Synthesis gold costs are being reduced by 50% for subscribers. The maximum key capacity is increasing from 100 to 120 for everyone. Subscribers can also claim 120 keys for free every day from the subscriber shop. Monsterling storage is being doubled from 3,000 to 6,000, and batch Monsterling Synthesis is increasing from 100 at a time to 300. That last part applies to everyone, not just subscribers. That's a pretty substantial set of changes, especially the daily keys. The Rift is finally getting quick battle. You'll still need to clear the applicable difficulty at least once each season. But after you've cleared it, you can use quick battle and spend multiple tickets without replaying the entire fight every single time. This might honestly be my favorite quality of life feature in the update. There's nothing wrong with making us prove we can beat something once. Making us manually repeat the exact same fight 100 times after that is a different story, so I'm very happy to see this. Conquest is also getting seasonal rankings, but before anybody panics about leaderboard rewards, the developers specifically said there are no ranking rewards right now. They don't want to turn the mode into an overly competitive system where players feel forced to chase rewards. They may eventually add things like badges or profile cosmetics as prestige rewards, but they aren't currently planning to attach major currencies or resources to rankings. I actually like that approach. Leaderboards are fine, giving whales massive additional progression rewards because they're already at the top of the leaderboard is where things can start getting ugly. We're also getting a live background feature. You'll be able to set animated backgrounds, choose how they rotate, and even have them cycle while the game is idle. It's not exactly game-changing, but it does give you another way to actually enjoy all of those animated character backgrounds that you've been collecting. And yes, the swimsuits are finally coming. The first two are Ophelia and Jiwon. Each costume will cost 29,000 Korean won. And more importantly, these are not limited time costumes. Once they're added to the shop, they'll remain available. The new wardrobe system will also let you choose costumes and configure idle animations. They've even prepared matching weapon appearances for the costumes, so they definitely put more effort into these than just swapping the character model. Version 1.3 is also adding new 5-star equipment, and this is another place where I've seen some confusion. I have seen it reported that 4-star equipment is being upgraded directly into 5-star equipment. That's not what I get from the Korean broadcast. What the developers actually talk about is adding new 5-star equipment and making it easier to craft using materials players have been accumulating through things like Dispatch. They also warned that the stats shown in the live stream were still being balanced, so I would not build anything around the exact numbers shown in that developer build. Wait for the final patch notes. Reruns were also discussed. The developers said they are preparing reruns and want to connect them with the larger balance overhaul, which makes sense. If you're about to buff an older character, it would be pretty frustrating to rerun that character before players know they're getting improved. But I have seen some people say that certain reruns are already confirmed for version 1.4. That's not quite accurate. Near the end of the broadcast, the developers specifically said they're considering reruns for 1.4, but that it still might not happen. And that brings us to September 3rd. That's when the developers are planning another live stream with a proper roadmap. That's when we're supposed to learn more about Vivian. That's when we should get more concrete information about reruns. More details about version 1.4, more balance information, and apparently more future costume plans as well. So August 19th is the version 1.3 update. But September 3rd might actually be the more important date if you're interested in the long-term direction of the game. So overall, version 1.3 is a little strange. If you're looking purely at brand new combat content, this probably isn't going to feel like a gigantic update. Episode 7 has been delayed. The major balance overhaul has been delayed. The larger new progression and content systems have been delayed, and the developers themselves acknowledged that they wanted to put more into this update than they were ultimately able to finish. But at the same time, I don't think I'd call version 1.3 a bad update. We're getting Brishell. We're getting new character stories, new 5-star gear, swimsuit costumes, Rift Quick Battle, better onboarding, better rerolling, better subscriptions, less annoying requests, more keys, better monsterling management, and several other quality of life improvements. So I think the easiest way to describe it is this. Version 1.3 looks like the cleanup and setup patch. Version 1.4 is supposed to be the overhaul. And after listening to almost 2 hours of the developer livestream, I think the most encouraging thing wasn't any one individual feature. It was that the developers seemed pretty willing to acknowledge where things haven't worked. The story has lacked direction. Character balance needs work. There isn't enough content. And some of the systems are more tedious than they need to be. Acknowledging those problems doesn't automatically mean they're going to fix all of them. We still have to see what they actually deliver, but version 1.4 is starting to sound like a very important update for MONGIL Star Dive. So let me know what you think. Are you excited for Brishell? Are you happy that Cloud is officially staying as the protagonist? And which of the version 1.3 quality of life changes are you most excited about? For me, Rift Quick Battle might actually be near the top of the list. And of course, I'll be watching the September 3rd roadmap closely because that's where we're finally supposed to get the bigger picture for version 1.4 and beyond. As always, thanks for watching. This is Casual Old Gamer, and I'll see you in the next one.